Everyone at the Ambrose Grand Hotel thought they were witnessing the wedding of the decade. Crystal chandeliers blazed above marble floors. Cameras flashed like lightning. Senators, celebrities, oil heirs, tech kings, and old money vultures filled the ballroom, all smiling at Victor Ambrose, the ruthless billionaire groom who had built his empire by breaking people quietly and burying scandals beautifully. But when the golden doors opened, every whisper died. Mara Vale walked in wearing a simple white suit, not a gown, no jewelry, no tears, no trembling hands, just a thin black folder pressed against her chest, the divorce papers Victor had spent months dodging while parading his pregnant mistress through society as if Mara had never existed. For 1 second, Victor's smile cracked. Then he laughed. He stood beside his mistress, one hand resting proudly over her stomach, while his mother, the terrifying matriarch Helena Ambrose, looked Mara up and down like she was dirt tracked onto imported silk. "You came to embarrass yourself," Victor asked loudly, letting the whole room hear. Mara said nothing, she simply raised the folder. That was when Helena snapped her fingers. Security moved in. The guests gasped as 2 guards blocked Mara's path. Victor chuckled into his champagne. His mistress smirked. Helena ordered, "Throw her out. This family does not negotiate with discarded women." And in front of everyone, they dragged Mara from the ballroom. But no one noticed the faint smile on her face. Because Mara had not come to beg. She had come to collect. 7 minutes later, every screen in the hotel went black. The music stopped. The lights dimmed. Phones buzzed across the room at once. Then the Ambrose family crest disappeared from the main stage and was replaced by a single line of text. "Welcome to the Mara Vale Grand." Victor froze. Helena's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. Before the guests could understand, Mara's voice filled the speakers, calm, elegant, deadly precise. She announced that as of that morning she had completed the secret acquisition of the hotel, including the ballroom, the security contracts, the event permits, and the private financial server Victor's family had illegally used for years to hide bribes, shell companies, stolen inheritance records, and the truth behind every accident that built the Ambrose dynasty. Then the doors opened again. This time, the security guards were not coming for Mara. They were coming for Victor. Reporters flooded the lobby. Federal agents stepped through the crowd. Investors began screaming into their phones. Helena tried to command the room, but no one listened anymore. And when Mara walked back inside, no one dared touch her. She placed the unsigned divorce papers on the wedding altar, looked Victor directly in the eyes, and said the words that ended his bloodline's reign before midnight. "You threw out your wife. Unfortunately for you, you did it in my hotel." By sunrise, the Ambrose name would no longer mean power. It would mean proof, betrayal, and the most expensive mistake a billionaire ever made. For the first time in his life, Victor Ambrose did not know where to put his hands. He had always known. In boardrooms, he clasped them behind his back, making men twice his age feel like boys called before a headmaster. At charity galas, he rested one hand in his pocket and lifted the other just enough to acknowledge applause. With women, he used touch like ownership, a palm at the waist, fingers around a wrist, a thumb beneath a chin, always gentle enough to look charming and firm enough to remind them who controlled the room. But now his hands hovered uselessly near his sides. 1 second earlier, he had been a groom with a private orchestra, a pregnant mistress, a mother more feared than most governments, and a family name that turned court orders into delays and scandals into rumors. The next second, the hotel beneath his expensive shoes no longer belonged to him. His security obeyed another woman, and the wife he thought he had broken was standing where a bride should have stood, placing divorce papers on his altar like a judge laying down a sentence. "Mara," he said, and her name came out smaller than he intended. She did not answer immediately. That silence was worse than shouting. It gave the guests time to look from Victor to Mara, from Mara to Helena, from Helena to the agents moving carefully through the ballroom. The old families in attendance recognized disaster before the younger millionaires did. They knew the sound of power changing hands. It was never loud at first. It arrived as quiet instructions, sealed documents, unreadable faces, and people who had always bowed suddenly choosing not to bow. Helena recovered first, because Helena always recovered first. "This is theater," she said, lifting her chin, "a desperate woman's little performance." Mara turned her eyes toward her former mother-in-law. "No, Helena, theater is what your family has been doing for 40 years. A murmur ran through the ballroom. Victor's mistress, Celeste Keene, shifted beside him. Her silver wedding-adjacent gown shimmered beneath the chandeliers, but her face had lost its shine. She looked at the agents, then at the screens, then down at the hand Victor still had near her stomach. Slowly, carefully, she moved half a step away from him. Victor noticed. So did Mara. So did Helena. That half step was the first visible crack in the Ambrose dynasty. "Take those screens down," Helena snapped. A hotel technician near the wall did not move. He was an older man with a thick mustache and a black earpiece. For 32 years, he had worked every Ambrose event, opening doors, fixing microphones, locating misplaced diamond bracelets, and pretending not to hear what wealthy people said when they forgot workers had ears. Tonight, he looked at Mara. Mara gave him the smallest nod. The screens stayed on. Helena's face tightened. It was not fear yet. Helena Ambrose had built an empire of controlled expressions. Even when her husband died under circumstances the newspapers called a tragic private aviation failure, she had worn black silk, accepted condolences, and used the funeral luncheon to negotiate a controlling stake in a shipping company. Fear did not come easily to her. But insult did. Being ignored by staff was an insult. Being ignored by staff inside a hotel she believed she owned was unforgivable. "You," she said to the technician, "you are fired." "No, Mrs. Ambrose," Mara said softly, "he was promoted." For a moment, the ballroom became so still that the dripping champagne from Helena's broken glass sounded like a clock. Victor forced a laugh. It was thin now. "You bought a hotel, congratulations. You think that makes you powerful." Mara looked around the ballroom, letting the question breathe. Once, long before Victor's tailored suits and private jets, Mara had stood in the laundry room beneath that same hotel, 12 years old, folding napkins beside her father because the babysitter had cancelled, and he could not afford to miss a shift. Elias Vale had been the night operations manager then, a man who knew every service hallway and every broken hinge, every guest who tipped, and every guest who smiled while treating employees like furniture. He had told Mara something that night while teaching her to fold linen into perfect rectangles. "Never mistake the person on stage for the person in control," he had said. "Sometimes the one holding the keys owns the ending." Mara had not understood him then. She had only watched the brass master key ring at his belt glint beneath fluorescent light. Now, 20 years later, she understood exactly. "No, Victor," she said, "buying one hotel did not make me powerful." The main screen changed. Ambrose Holdings, debt structure. Ambrose Shipping, hidden liability. Ambrose Charitable Trust, transfer records. Ambrose Grand Hotel, illegal server logs. Ambrose Medical Foundation, diverted endowments. Ambrose Construction Shell, vendors. Ambrose Family Office, private settlement archive. Every line appeared one after another, clean and cold, like a staircase descending into darkness. "Buying the hotel," Mara continued, "gave me the keys." Victor stared at the screen, and all the color left his face. Helena turned not to the screen but to Mara. That was how Mara knew the older woman understood the danger better than anyone else. Victor saw documents. Helena saw access. Helena saw chain of custody, contracts, servers, witnesses, recordings, security footage, hidden rooms, staff testimonies, and old lies that had slept comfortably behind locked doors. Mara had not bought a hotel. She had bought the Ambrose family's memory. An agent approached Victor. "Mr. Ambrose, we need you to come with us for questioning." Victor stepped back. "This is my wedding." Mara's mouth did not move, but something in her eyes shifted. It was never a wedding, it was a coronation. The words struck deeper than anyone expected. Because Victor had called it that once. Not in public, not in front of cameras, not even in front of Helena. He had said it in Mara's bathroom 6 years earlier, on the morning after their own wedding, while steam curled around mirrors and the city glittered beyond the penthouse windows. Mara had been standing barefoot in a robe, smiling at the ring on her finger like a woman who believed love could survive wealth if both people held it carefully enough. Victor had come up behind her, kissed her shoulder, and said, "Yesterday was not a wedding, darling, it was a coronation. You became one of us." She had laughed then because she thought he was joking. He had not been joking. That was the first thing Mara learned about the Ambroses. They did not marry people, they absorbed them. At first, absorption felt like devotion. Victor sent dresses before she asked. Helena introduced her to women who chaired museums and men who owned newspapers. Private drivers waited downstairs. Assistants learned her coffee order. A stylist replaced half her wardrobe with clothes that looked like her but cost more than her father had made in a year. Victor called it protection. Helena called it refinement. Mara called it love because she did not yet know the difference between being cherished and being managed. The second thing Mara learned was that every gift came with invisible ink. A bracelet meant attendance at a gala. A vacation meant smiling beside Victor while he closed a deal. A donation in her name meant silence when she noticed the foundation's numbers did not balance. A seat on a board meant signing minutes prepared before meetings happened. The Ambroses gave beautifully, but their gifts were cages lined with velvet. "You're too suspicious," Victor used to say when she questioned him. "You're too emotional," Helena would add. Mara had believed them longer than she liked to admit. Because the truth was painful. It was easier to think she was adjusting poorly to wealth than to admit the man she married had chosen her partly because she was brilliant, partly because she was beautiful, and partly because she came from no family powerful enough to fight back. Her father had been dead 3 years by then. Her mother had died when Mara was a child. There were no uncles with law firms, no brothers with security teams, no old money cousins whispering warnings. Just Mara, her degree in forensic accounting, her father's old key ring in a drawer, and a husband who kissed her forehead whenever he lied. The lies began small. A cancelled dinner. A locked study. A phone face down. A charity account that rounded numbers too perfectly. Then one rainy night, 6 months before Victor's second wedding, Mara opened a file she was not supposed to open. The file was named Heritage Maintenance. It sounded harmless. Ambrose files always sounded harmless. Inside were scanned settlements, quiet payments, insurance adjustments, building inspection edits, and old hotel acquisition records dating back to the year Elias Vale had lost his job. Mara saw her father's name in a margin note. Problem employee, pressed questions, neutralized through severance and reputation review. Mara remembered the winter after that severance, her father selling his watch, her father telling her not to worry while counting coins for groceries, her father sitting awake at the kitchen table with papers spread before him, whispering, "Numbers don't lie, baby, people do." He had died before he could prove what he knew. Mara had cried over his grave, believing poverty and stress had taken him. That night in Victor's study, with rain striking the windows like thrown gravel, she learned that grief sometimes waits years to become anger. She copied one file, then another, then every file she could reach before the system locked her out. Victor came home 20 minutes later smelling faintly of another woman's perfume. He found Mara in the hallway, not the study. She had learned from Helena to never be caught where you were most dangerous. You're awake, he said. So are you. He smiled, removed his cufflinks, and lied without effort. Investor dinner ran late. Mara looked at his shirt collar. There was lipstick there, a soft rose shade she never wore. A different woman might have confronted him. The old Mara might have cried. The Mara standing in that hallway thought of her father's severance papers and said, "You should sleep. Big day tomorrow." Victor kissed her cheek. "That's my girl." After he walked away, Mara stood motionless until the bedroom door closed. Then she whispered into the empty hall, "Not anymore." From that night onward, she became patient in a way Victor had never expected. He mistook her quiet for defeat because men like Victor often believed silence belonged only to the powerless. He forgot that silence also belonged to hunters, auditors, chess players, and women who had finally stopped asking to be loved properly. Mara started with the hotel. Not because it was the largest Ambrose asset, it was not. Not because it was the most profitable, it was not. But because of the keys. The Ambrose Grand Hotel had been the family's preferred stage for everything: weddings, negotiations, political dinners, private apologies, public donations, secret recordings, loyalty tests, and reputational executions. People confessed in suites, lawyers met in lounges, mistresses waited in penthouses, enemies were charmed in ballrooms before being ruined elsewhere. Her father used to say the hotel heard more truth than church. Mara began buying pieces of it through companies no one connected to her: a parking structure note, a maintenance vendor, a minority hospitality fund, a distressed insurance claim, a security subcontractor whose owner wanted out. The building's debt had been sliced and traded so many times that the Ambroses stopped paying attention to who held the knife. Helena should have noticed. Helena, who taught Victor that sentiment was a weakness and apologies were for people without lawyers. Helena, who could smell betrayal across a dinner table. Helena, who once told Mara, while adjusting a diamond pin on her dress, "A woman survives in powerful families by understanding which rooms she is allowed to enter." Mara had smiled then. Later, she bought the rooms. The ballroom returned to motion in fragments. A senator tried to leave, but an agent near the exit asked him to remain available for questioning. An heiress deleted something from her phone with shaking fingers. A venture capitalist who had toasted Victor 15 minutes earlier began pretending he had barely known him. The string quartet sat frozen with instruments in their laps. Celeste whispered, "Victor, what did you do?" The question should have been absurd. She had been standing beside him as his bride-to-be while his actual wife was thrown out. She had accepted the ring, the penthouse, the magazine profile, the gentle headlines calling her the fresh future of the Ambrose family. She knew enough to be guilty of cruelty, but not enough to understand the empire. Victor rounded on her, "Do not perform innocence now." Celeste flinched. Mara saw it. It reminded her of a dinner 2 years before, when Victor had corrected the way Mara pronounced the name of a French vineyard. He had smiled while doing it. Everyone had laughed lightly, as if it were charming. Beneath the table, Helena had patted Mara's knee and murmured, "Learn faster." That was how the Ambroses trained people. Never one blow, just 1,000 polished humiliations until you began doing half the work for them. Celeste was not innocent, but she was young enough to believe Victor's money would shield her from the cost of standing near him. Mara had once believed a different version of the same lie. "Ms. Kane," Mara said. Celeste looked at her like she expected to be slapped by words. Mara did not raise her voice. "Your attorney is waiting in the East Conference room. I suggest you use her." Victor's head snapped around. Her attorney. Celeste's lips parted. "You arranged an attorney for me." "No," Mara said. "I arranged a choice." Helena gave a cold laugh. "How noble. Is this the part where you pretend you are merciful?" Mara finally stepped closer to Helena. The room seemed to lean with her. "I learned mercy from my father," Mara said. "I learned strategy from you." For the first time, Helena said nothing. Mara had imagined this confrontation many times, usually at night when sleep would not come. In some versions, she shouted. In others, she wept. In the worst versions, she begged Helena to admit what she had done, to admit the Ambroses had ruined Elia's veil, because he had discovered a pattern in hotel financials that led to off-book payments and forged acquisition documents. But revenge, Mara discovered, became cleaner when it stopped needing confession. She had proof now. The proof had come from a place Helena never thought to check, the basement archives. 3 months earlier, Mara had entered the hotel through the loading dock at 2:13 in the morning. She wore jeans, a grey sweatshirt, and the same calm expression she wore now. The old technician, Mr. Alvarez, had met her by the freight elevator. "You look like your father," he had said. Mara had almost lost her composure then. Mr. Alvarez had worked under Elia's veil. He was the one who told Mara about the archive room that did not appear on modern floor plans. In the days before cloud storage, Ambrose executives had kept duplicate records there, trusting dust more than digital trails. When Victor modernized the hotel, no one bothered to clear it properly. Rich people feared hackers. They rarely feared cardboard boxes. The basement smelled of metal, old paper, and forgotten rain. Mara found invoices, tape labels, maintenance logs, guest ledgers, security memos. A photograph of her father younger than she remembered him, standing beside the service elevator with a crooked smile and a clipboard hugged to his chest. On the back, in his handwriting, were 5 words. "The building remembers for us." Mara held that photograph until Mr. Alvarez gently touched her shoulder. "Keep looking," he said. By dawn, they had found enough to begin the collapse. Not all of it was dramatic at first. Real destruction rarely begins with explosions. It begins with dates matching dates they should not match, signatures appearing where signers were out of the country, shell companies paying vendors that never existed, board approvals typed before board meetings took place, and a dead man's warnings buried in personnel files. Mara took everything to an old classmate from university, Naomi Chen, now a federal prosecutor with tired eyes and an allergy to billionaires who believed fines were just luxury taxes. Naomi had listened for 2 hours without interrupting. When Mara finished, Naomi said, "If half of this authenticates, you do not have a divorce case. You have a dynasty case." "What does that mean?" Naomi leaned back. "It means do not confront them until every door is covered." So Mara covered every door. She covered the hotel doors, the financial doors, the media doors, the legal doors, the family doors. She let Victor think she was spiraling. She ignored gossip columns. She allowed paparazzi to catch her looking tired outside her attorney's office. She stopped correcting people who called Celeste his fiancée. She let Helena send pity through mutual acquaintances like poisoned flowers. Then Victor made the mistake Mara had been waiting for. He chose the Ambrose Grand Hotel for his wedding. At first, Mara thought even he would not be that arrogant. Surely he would choose a palace in Europe, an island resort, a cathedral-like estate, somewhere untouched by the first wife he wanted erased. But Victor loved symbolism as much as Helena did. He wanted to remarry in the ballroom where Ambrose's power was most visible. He wanted cameras. He wanted Mara humiliated by headlines. He wanted the world to accept Celeste as the future and Mara as a bitter footnote. He did not know that ownership papers would close at 8:00 that morning. He did not know that the hotel's internal systems would transfer at 10:30. He did not know that the security team had signed new contracts before lunch. He did not know that the staff he treated as invisible had spent years watching, remembering, and waiting for someone with enough power to ask the right questions. Most importantly, Victor did not know that Mara still had her father's brass key ring in her pocket when security dragged her out. The guests had seen humiliation. Mara had felt metal against her palm and thought, the door is open. Now in the ballroom, the Dynasty's guests watched the Ambroses discover what invisible people could do when they stopped being invisible. Victor pulled away from the agent. I will not be handled like a criminal. No one called you a criminal, Mara said, yet. His eyes burned. You think this makes you better than me? No. Then what does it make you? Mara glanced at the hotel ceiling, at the chandeliers Elia's veil once helped repair during a Christmas storm when half the city lost power and the Ambroses demanded their gala continue. She remembered being 13, sitting in the staff break room with a paper cup of cocoa while her father came down from a ladder with tiny cuts across his knuckles. He had smiled and told her, one day you will walk through the front entrance because you belong there, not because someone lets you. Mara looked back at Victor. It makes me finished. He did not understand, that was clear. To men like Victor, revenge was supposed to be obsession. He expected her life to still revolve around him, even in victory. He expected her to want him ruined because she still wanted him somehow. He expected rage to be a chain connecting them. But Mara did not feel chained. She felt tired. Victor had mistaken himself for the center of her story because he had always been the center of his own. But the deeper wound was older than their marriage, older than Celeste, older than the divorce papers. Victor was merely the final Ambrose who thought a veil could be discarded without consequence. Helena understood that too. You will regret this, Helena said. Mara almost smiled. You said the same thing when I refused your settlement. The memory moved between them like a blade. 4 months earlier, Helena had invited Mara to tea in the West Penthouse. It was the room Helena used when she wanted to destroy someone gently. White roses, silver tray, lemon slices thin as glass, 2 lawyers standing near the window pretending to be furniture. On the table lay a settlement offer. $50 million. A non-disclosure agreement. A public statement citing irreconcilable differences and wishing Victor and Celeste joy. A clause preventing Mara from using the Ambrose name, speaking to press, contacting board members, filing future claims, or retaining documents from the marriage. Helena had poured tea. Take the money, she said, disappear beautifully. Mara had looked at the papers, and if I do. Helena stirred her tea once, then you disappear anyway. There had been a time when those words might have frightened Mara, but by then she had already seen her father's photograph in the basement archive. She had already spoken to Mr. Alvarez. She had already discovered that Helena's personal assistant had used the hotel server to move encrypted settlement drafts. She had already bought 2 pieces of the hotel through a Delaware company named Key and Lantern. So Mara picked up the teacup and said, "Did you know my father hated lemon in tea?" Helena's eyes sharpened. It was the smallest reaction. It told Mara everything. You remember him, Mara said. Helena set down her spoon. I remember many employees. He remembered you too. For the first time in the conversation, Helena looked directly at her. Mara leaned forward. That should worry you. Now, in the ballroom, Helena looked at Mara with the same sharpened eyes, but there was something else behind them. Calculation. Helena turned to the guests and lifted both hands. My friends, she began, her voice instantly smoother, you are witnessing a domestic dispute being weaponized by an unstable former spouse. Former spouse. The words were deliberate. Mara's divorce papers were unsigned. Legally, she was still Victor's wife. Helena knew it. Everyone close to the family knew it. But Helena had survived decades by saying false things with such confidence that weaker people rearranged reality to match her tone. Some guests relaxed slightly. People wanted the powerful to remain powerful. It made the world feel predictable. Then the screen changed again. A video appeared. Helena in the West Penthouse. White roses, silver tray, lemon slices thin as glass. Her own voice filled the ballroom. Take the money, disappear beautifully. Then Mara's voice, and if I do. Helena, clear as crystal, then you disappear anyway. The room inhaled. Helena did not move. Victor stared at his mother. You recorded that. Mara shook her head. No, your hotel did. Mr. Alvarez, standing near the sound booth, looked down. Every Ambrose knew the hotel recorded certain penthouse rooms for security. They had used those recordings for leverage for years. Politicians, executives, rivals, lovers, enemies. The camera angles were hidden in smoke detectors and decorative vents. Victor had once joked that privacy was only for people who could afford enforcement. Mara had found the enforcement. Helena's lawyers moved toward her, speaking quickly, but Naomi Chen stepped into the ballroom at that moment with 2 more agents beside her. Naomi wore a navy suit and the expression of a woman who had waited years to enter a room like this with proper authorization. Mrs. Ambrose, Naomi said, we need to speak with you. Helena did not look at Naomi, she looked at Mara. You think government people can protect you? Mara answered gently, no, I think evidence can. Helena's nostrils flared. It was small, almost nothing. But everyone saw it, because everyone was watching her now. Victor's world continued to disassemble itself in public. His phone rang again, then lit up with messages he could not read fast enough. Board members, bankers, lawyers, a crisis manager, his private chief of staff, the head of Ambrose Shipping, the family office, unknown numbers. A news alert appeared across multiple guest screens at once. Ambrose Holdings under federal investigation after hotel raid. Then another. Ambrose Grand, ACQIAD by Vale Hospitality Group, HOURS, before high society wedding. Then another. Victor Ambrose wedding, interrupted by evidence presentation, SOURCESA. The headlines were clumsy, fast, imperfect. But they existed. That was enough. The Ambrose machine depended on controlling the first story. Once the first story escaped, every hidden story began looking for a mouth. A man near the front table stood abruptly. He was Lawrence Pike, chairman of North Meridian Bank, Ambrose Holdings' largest lender. His wife grabbed his sleeve, whispering, but he pulled away and walked toward the exit. Lawrence, Victor called. Pike did not stop. Victor called louder, Lawrence. Pike turned only when an agent near the door asked him to wait. His face had the hard, bloodless look of a banker who had just realized collateral might be radioactive. My office will be in touch, he said. Helena closed her eyes for 1 second. Mara saw it. Banks were more dangerous than reporters. Reporters ruined reputations. Banks accelerated debt. Ambrose Holdings looked invincible from the outside, but Mara knew the balance sheets. She had studied them while Victor slept, while Celeste posed for magazines, while Helena ordered flowers for a wedding that should never have happened. The empire was over-leveraged. It depended on confidence, refinancing, and the illusion that the Ambrose name could still bend outcomes. Tonight, confidence was bleeding onto marble. Celeste's mother, who had been seated in the second row with a smile too proud to be kind, began crying quietly. Celeste herself looked trapped between shame and panic. Mara did not pity her exactly, but she remembered what it was like to stand beside Victor while the room applauded your own erasure. Go to your attorney, Mara said again. Celeste looked at Victor. Victor said, if you leave my side now, you will regret it. There it was. Not love. Not reassurance. A threat dressed as possession. Celeste's face changed. For months she had been cruel because cruelty made her feel chosen. She had posted photographs in restaurants Mara loved. She had worn earrings Victor once bought Mara. She had given interviews about new beginnings while Mara was still legally married. But beneath the glitter and ambition, Celeste had not truly understood the Ambrose family's favorite language until Victor aimed it at her. "I'm pregnant," she whispered. Victor's jaw tightened, then behaved like the mother of an Ambrose. Mara watched Celeste's hand move protectively over her stomach. That was the second crack. Celeste stepped away from Victor and walked toward the east doors. Victor lunged after her, but an agent blocked him. "You cannot keep everyone," Mara said. His eyes whipped toward her. "You poisoned her." "No, you spoke." Helena made a sharp sound. "Enough." She strode toward Mara with the old authority that had made executives stand, servants vanish, and relatives lower their voices at Thanksgiving dinners. For one strange second, Mara saw not a villain, but a woman built from fear so old it had hardened into command. Helena had not been born into the Ambrose family. She married in, just as Mara had. Before Helena became the matriarch, she had been Helena Marrow, daughter of a disgraced broker, raised among people who smiled at her poverty and invited her only when they needed someone decorative. Mara had learned that from archived society pages. Helena had clawed her way into power, then spent the rest of her life making sure no one could remove her from it. Somewhere along the way, survival became appetite. Appetite became doctrine. Doctrine became family tradition. But understanding a monster did not require feeding it. Helena stopped close enough for Mara to smell her perfume. "You foolish little girl," she said quietly. "You had a seat at the table." Mara held her gaze. "No, I was on the menu." A few people heard. The words rippled. Helena's hand lifted. Not far, not dramatically. Just enough that everyone understood she had almost slapped Mara. Mara did not flinch. That, more than anything, changed the room. Because people like Helena depended on flinching, they did not need to strike if the threat did its work first. Mara's stillness denied her the small satisfaction of fear. Naomi stepped closer. "Mrs. Ambrose." Helena lowered her hand slowly. Mara leaned in, voice only for her. "My father stood in this hotel with less protection than I have tonight. You ruined him because he found your numbers. You taught your son to ruin me because I found them again. Did you truly think the building would forget twice?" For the first time, Helena's eyes flickered. There it was. Recognition. Not guilt. Helena was too practiced for guilt. But recognition. "You have his stubbornness," Helena said. Mara felt the words hit somewhere old and bruised. Elias Vale had been called stubborn in the personnel file too. Stubborn meant he would not sign false inventory reports. Stubborn meant he asked why maintenance funds disappeared before safety repairs were completed. Stubborn meant he refused to blame immigrant staff for missing money they had never touched. Stubborn meant he copied documents and hid them where only someone who knew the building could find them. Stubborn meant dead poor instead of rich silent. Mara swallowed once. "And you," she said, "have nothing left to offer but threats." Helena smiled faintly. "Threats are often enough." "Not tonight." Naomi nodded to the agents. Helena Ambrose was not dragged. People like Helena arranged their bodies into dignity even when cornered. She walked between the agents as if they were escorts to a private dinner, but when she passed Victor, she did not comfort him. She did not ask after Celeste. She did not glance toward the guests who had worshipped her for decades. She looked only at Mara. "This is not over," Helena said. Mara believed her. That was why she had prepared for the morning after. As Helena was led away for questioning, Victor finally broke. Not loudly. Loud would have been easier. Instead, he laughed again. This laugh was different from the one he had used when Mara entered with divorce papers. That earlier laugh had been a weapon. This one was a cracked mirror. "You think you won?" he asked. "You think because you bought bricks and found old files, you have beaten my family?" Mara said nothing. Victor stepped closer until the agent warned him to stop. "My name is on towers, hospitals, museums, scholarships, campaign funds. Your father folded napkins in a basement. You were nothing before me. Mara felt the ballroom waiting for her to wound him back. She could have. She knew about Victor's private panic attacks before investor calls. She knew about the speech coach Helena hired when he was 17 because his voice shook in public. She knew about the older brother who had left the family and been erased from portraits. She knew Victor feared irrelevance more than prison, poverty more than loneliness, and his mother's disappointment more than God. She could have opened him like a file. Instead, she picked up the divorce papers from the altar. You are right about one thing, she said. Before you, I was not an Ambrose. Victor's mouth curled. Exactly. Mara held out a pen. And after tonight, neither are you. He frowned. The screen changed again. An emergency board resolution appeared. Ambrose Holdings Board of Directors. Special session called. Temporary suspension of Victor Ambrose as Chief Executive Officer pending investigation. Immediate separation of Helena Ambrose from all advisory authority. Review of family voting control due to material misconduct clauses. Victor stared. That is not possible. Mara tilted her head. You should read your own bylaws. Victor had inherited power. Mara had studied it. That was the difference. In most family dynasties, control was protected by blood, but the Ambroses had taken outside money during an expansion spree 15 years earlier. To reassure institutional investors, they agreed to morality clauses, regulatory cooperation clauses, and emergency governance triggers they never expected anyone to use. As long as scandals stayed buried, the clauses were decorative. Mara made them functional. A grey-haired board member named Evelyn Ross rose from a table near the side. She had been silent all night, watching with hands folded. Years ago, she had been Elias Vale's supervisor before marrying into finance and climbing to power of her own. She had never forgotten the night Elias warned her that something was wrong with the hotel accounts. She had been too afraid then to help him. Tonight, she was afraid again. But age had taught her the cost of cowardice. The votes are already moving, Evelyn said. Victor turned on her. You. Evelyn's face was pale but steady. Your mother kept files on all of us. Mara returned mine unopened. That sentence did more damage than any accusation. Around the ballroom, people began understanding the shape of Mara's revenge. She had not merely exposed secrets. She had chosen what not to expose. She had separated the trapped from the guilty, the weak from the cruel, the compromised from the architects. She had offered certain people exits before the fire reached them. That was why so many doors had closed on Victor tonight. Not because everyone suddenly became moral. Because Mara had given them a safer future without him. Victor looked around the room and saw it all at once. The guests avoiding his eyes, the investors whispering, the staff standing with unusual stillness, the agents waiting, his bride gone, his mother removed, his wife holding the pen. The Ambrose name, once a fortress, had become a locked room with him inside. You cannot do this, he said. Mara's voice softened, and somehow that made it worse. I already did. His hand trembled when he took the pen. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Victor loved control too much to surrender publicly. But he loved survival more. He signed. Not with dignity, not with apology, with rage pressed so hard into the paper that the pen tore through on the final letter. Mara accepted the documents from him without touching his hand. A photographer's camera clicked. Victor flinched at the sound. That was the third crack. Mara turned to Naomi. You have what you need. For tonight, Naomi said. That phrase mattered. For tonight. Mara knew justice moved more slowly than humiliation. There would be injunctions, appeals, denials, interviews, countersuits, anonymous leaks, private threats, emergency motions, and men on television explaining that financial crimes were complicated and perhaps everyone should wait before judging a great American family. She had prepared for that too. At 11:59 p.m., 3 encrypted evidence packages would be released to separate law firms if Mara failed to confirm her safety. At midnight, a public archive would open containing authenticated documents cleared by attorneys. At 12:01, hotel employees past and present would receive notices of a compensation trust funded by recovered Ambrose assets and Mara's own acquisition fund. At 12:02, Elias Vale's personnel file would be corrected. That last part mattered most. Not to the world. To Mara. The world cared about billionaires falling. Mara cared about a dead man no longer being called dishonest. She walked out of the ballroom while chaos bloomed behind her. No one stopped her. In the lobby, the hotel looked different, though nothing visible had changed. The marble still gleamed, the fountains still whispered, the floral arrangements still towered over polished tables, but the air had shifted. Employees stood straighter, guests spoke softer, news crews pressed against glass doors outside, their lights turning the night silver. Mr. Alvarez joined Mara near the front desk. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he reached into his jacket and took out an old brass key. "I kept this," he said. Mara recognized it immediately, the master key from her father's ring, the one missing from the set she had inherited. Its teeth were worn smooth by years of doors, years of service, years of being useful to people who rarely said thank you. Her throat tightened. "You had it. Your father gave it to me the week before he left. Said if his little girl ever came asking about locked rooms, I should make sure she had help." Mara looked down at the key. The lobby blurred. She had spent years thinking Elias Vale died defeated, poor, discredited, silenced, but he had not only been silenced, he had prepared a witness, he had hidden documents, he had trusted that someday his daughter might become exactly who she needed to be. He knew, Mara whispered. Mr. Alvarez shook his head gently. He hoped. That almost broke her. Not the humiliation, not the affair, not Victor's laughter, not Helena's threats. Hope. Her father's hope, waiting 20 years in a hotel basement, was the one thing Mara had not armored herself against. She closed her fingers around the key. "Thank you," she said. Mr. Alvarez's eyes shone. "No, Miss Vale, thank you for coming back through the front door." A noise rose outside as reporters spotted movement near the entrance. Naomi appeared beside Mara, phone in hand. "You do not have to speak tonight," Naomi said. Mara looked through the glass. Beyond the doors stood cameras, microphones, strangers hungry for a story simple enough to sell. Betrayed wife destroys billionaire husband, pregnant mistress flees wedding, matriarch exposed, dynasty collapses, hotel revenge. They would flatten it because that was what headlines did. But Mara thought of staff who had been blamed for missing money, families who had signed settlements because they could not afford court, contractors bankrupted by Ambrose delays, donors misled, patients promised clinics that were never fully funded, her father's name in a file beside the word problem. She shook her head. "I will speak." Naomi studied her as a victim. Mara looked at the ballroom doors behind her. The music had not resumed. "No," she said, as the owner. The front doors opened. Sound crashed over her, questions, flashes, shouted names. "Mara, did you plan this? Is Victor Ambrose being arrested? Did you buy the hotel today? Are the corruption allegations true? What about Celeste Keene? Is Helena Ambrose involved?" Mara stood beneath the hotel awning, white suit bright against the night, the brass key hidden in her palm. She did not answer immediately. She let them photograph her silence. Then she said, "Tonight is not about a failed marriage. My marriage ended privately long before this wedding began publicly." The reporters quieted. This is about a family that believed money could turn truth into property. It is about workers threatened into silence. It is about charities used as costumes. It is about contracts written to protect criminals instead of people. It is about every person who was told they were too small to challenge a name carved into a building. Her voice did not shake. The Ambrose family forgot something my father taught me in this hotel. Buildings remember, staff remember, numbers remember, and eventually the truth finds someone willing to unlock the door. Questions erupted again, but Mara turned before they swallowed her. She had said enough for one night. Behind her, across the ballroom, Victor watched the live broadcast on a phone someone had abandoned on a table. He saw Mara standing beneath the awning like she belonged to the building more than he ever had. He saw viewers online multiplying by the second. He saw comments pouring in faster than his mind could process. Then the phone buzzed with an incoming call. Mother! For one strange second, he almost laughed. Helena was in federal custody for questioning and still calling him as if he were late for dinner. He answered. Her voice was low, controlled. Listen carefully. Victor turned away from the agents nearby. Mother, they are saying the board. Forget the board. Forget the board, they are taking the company. They have already taken the company, Helena said. Now we protect the family. Victor's mouth went dry. How? There was a pause. Helena's pauses had shaped his entire life. As a boy, he had waited inside them for approval. As a man, he had mistaken them for wisdom. Tonight, for the first time, he heard what lived beneath them. Emptiness. You will say you acted alone in certain operational matters, Helena said. Victor gripped the phone. What? You will say I was unaware of specific documents. His laugh came out harsh. No. You are young enough to rebuild. I am not going to prison for you. You are my son. Exactly. Another pause. Then Helena's voice changed. Not much, just enough to reveal the blade. You have always enjoyed the crown, Victor. Do not complain because it has weight. The call ended. Victor lowered the phone slowly. All his life, he had believed Helena's love was severe because greatness required severity. When she criticized him, it was training. When she withheld affection, it was discipline. When she arranged his friendships, career, marriage, and public image, it was strategy. Even his cruelty had felt inherited, almost noble, like an old family sword passed from hand to hand. But now, standing amid wilted wedding flowers and abandoned champagne, he understood what Mara had understood before him. The Ambrose family did not love. It consumed. And he was no longer useful enough to spare. Across the lobby, Celeste sat in the East Conference room with her attorney. Her makeup had smudged, but her voice was steady as she answered questions. She explained what Victor told her, what Helena promised, what documents she had signed without reading, which gifts came through which accounts, and which conversations suddenly seemed less romantic in memory. At one point, the attorney asked, Did Mara Vale threaten you? Celeste looked through the glass wall toward the lobby, where Mara was speaking with hotel employees. No, Celeste said quietly, she warned me. That answer became important later. By 2:00 a.m., the Ambrose wedding cake still stood untouched in the ballroom. 5 tiers, white sugar orchids, gold leaf, a tiny sculpture of Victor and Celeste at the top, smiling forever in a future that had lasted less than an hour. A young kitchen assistant asked what to do with it. Mara looked at the cake and almost laughed. Serve it to the night staff, she said. The assistant blinked. All of it. All of it. So while billionaires screamed into phones and lawyers filled conference rooms, housekeepers, line cooks, bellmen, drivers, dishwashers, and security guards ate the Ambrose wedding cake in the staff cafeteria. Some laughed, some cried, some ate in silence. Mr. Alvarez cut Mara a small slice and set it beside a cup of black coffee. You should eat, he said. I'm not hungry. Your father used to say the same thing when he was carrying too much. Mara took the fork. The cake tasted expensive and strangely ordinary. At 3:10 a.m., Evelyn Ross found Mara in the old service corridor near the freight elevator. The older woman looked smaller away from the ballroom, her pearl earrings removed, her silver hair slightly loosened. I owe you an apology, Evelyn said. Mara leaned against the wall. For tonight. For 20 years ago. Mara looked at her. Evelyn's eyes filled, but she did not let tears fall. Your father came to me, he showed me discrepancies, I believed him, but I had 2 children, a mortgage, and no protection. Helena made it clear that if I supported him, I would lose everything. So you let him lose everything? Evelyn closed her eyes. Yes. The word was plain. No excuses after it. Mara had imagined this moment too. She had imagined satisfaction, maybe anger sharp enough to cleanse. But standing there, exhausted, with her father's key in her pocket and wedding cake sugar on her tongue, she felt only the heavy sadness of understanding how fear travels through ordinary people until it becomes a wall. I cannot forgive you tonight, Mara said. Evelyn nodded. I know. But you can testify. I will. Under oath. Yes. And you can help return what was stolen from the employees. Evelyn straightened. I already called 3 board members. There will be resistance, but not enough. Mara studied her. This was another lesson power had taught her. Remorse without repair was just performance. Then start there, Mara said. Evelyn nodded once and walked away. At 4:00 a.m., Mara finally went upstairs to the presidential suite. Not the West penthouse that had been Helena's. Not the bridal suite that had been Celeste. The presidential suite had been reserved for Victor after the reception, a place where he expected to begin his new marriage above the city, wrapped in victory. Mara entered alone. The room was full of flowers. White roses again. For a moment she stood in the doorway, remembering Helena's tea, the settlement papers, the lemon slices. Then she crossed the room, opened the balcony doors, and let the cold night air rush in. The city below was awake with scandal. Helicopters circled in the distance. News vans crowded the curb. Somewhere beneath her, the hotel staff moved through the building, resetting rooms, giving statements, changing passwords, removing Ambrose crests from digital displays. Mara removed the divorce papers from the black folder. Victor's signature looked angry. Hers looked calm. She placed the papers on the desk and set her father's brass key on top. Then she allowed herself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, no collapsing to the floor, just one hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking while the city blurred beyond the balcony. She cried for the woman who had believed Victor. She cried for the girl folding napkins in the basement. She cried for Elias Vale, who had hidden hope inside a building that tried to swallow him. She cried because victory did not return the years. It only returned the truth. At 6:30 a.m., sunrise touched the hotel windows. By then, Ambrose Holdings shares were in free fall overseas. North Meridian Bank had issued a default review notice. 3 board members resigned. 2 former Ambrose employees gave televised interviews without showing their faces. A senator's office released a statement claiming full cooperation. The Ambrose Medical Foundation froze outgoing transfers. A judge granted emergency preservation orders over company records. At 7:00 a.m., Helena's attorneys filed their first denial. At 7:12, Victor's attorneys filed a separate denial that carefully did not mention Helena. At 7:20, entertainment sites posted slow-motion clips of Mara re-entering the ballroom. At 7:44, a business channel called it the most spectacular private collapse of an American family empire in recent memory. At 8:00, the public archive opened. The first document was Elias Vale's memo. Mara had placed it there herself. Not the most explosive document, not the one reporters would love most, not the one that would send executives running. Her father's memo, dated 20 years earlier. Clear, careful, humble, brave. In it, he wrote that funds were missing, workers were being blamed, and senior management had approved false corrections. He requested independent review. He warned that ignoring the discrepancies would harm employees, investors, and the hotel's integrity. At the bottom, in blue ink, was Helena's handwritten note to legal. Handle him. By noon, Elias Vale's name was trending. Not as a problem employee. As a whistleblower. Mara sat in the hotel office that had once belonged to Helena and watched strangers say her father's name correctly. That was when Victor arrived. Not through the front entrance. He no longer had courage for cameras. He came through the private garage with 2 attorneys and no mother. His tie was gone. His face looked older by 10 years. Mara agreed to see him because the divorce required final procedural signatures, and because some part of her wanted to know what a fallen Ambrose sounded like without applause. He entered the office and looked around. Helena's portrait had already been removed from the wall. Victor noticed. "You work fast," he said. "I learned from your mother." He winced. Good. For a moment they stood across from each other with a desk between them. Once they had shared a bed, a name, a future carefully designed by people who never asked Mara what she wanted. Now he looked like a stranger wearing the outline of someone she had loved. "Did any of it matter to you?" he asked. Mara almost laughed. "You are asking me that?" "I mean us." The word us landed weakly. Mara remembered their first meeting, a charity audit, Victor arriving late, apologizing charmingly, asking sharp questions that impressed her. He had looked at her like her mind delighted him. For months, he made her feel seen. He listened to her talk about numbers, systems, her father, grief. He sent books instead of flowers. He said he loved that she did not flatter him. Maybe some of that had been real. That was the cruelest part. Monsters did not always lie every second. Sometimes they told enough truth to make the cage feel chosen. "Yes," Mara said, "it mattered to me." Victor swallowed. "That is why it worked," she added. His face hardened. "I did love you." "No, Victor. You loved being admired by someone who still had a conscience." His attorneys shifted behind him. Victor ignored them. "And what did you love?" Mara thought about it. "I loved who I became while trying to survive you," she said. That hurt him more than she expected. His eyes flashed, then dropped. For 1 second, she saw the boy beneath Helena's training, the boy raised to believe tenderness was weakness and dominance was inheritance. That boy might have deserved rescue once. But Mara had learned not every wounded person had the right to become someone else's wound. Victor placed the remaining documents on the desk. "You have destroyed me," he said. Mara signed where her attorney indicated. "No, I stopped protecting you from yourself." He leaned forward, voice low. "My mother will come for you." "I know. You are not afraid." Mara looked at her father's key sitting beside the documents. "I am afraid of many things. I am just done obeying fear." Victor had no answer for that. After he left, Mara walked through the hotel alone. She did not take the grand staircase. She took the service corridors, past laundry, past kitchens, past storage rooms and staff lockers. People stopped when they saw her, unsure whether to greet her as owner, victim, hero, or something more complicated. Mara greeted them first. By name when she knew it. With respect when she did not. Near the basement archive, she paused. The door had been repainted many times, but old scratches remained near the lock. She took out the brass key Mr. Alvarez had given her. It no longer opened that modern lock, of course. Everything had changed. cards, codes, biometrics systems. Still, she held the key to the door and smiled. Some keys were not for opening locks anymore. Some were for remembering who had been locked out. 3 weeks later, the Ambrose name was removed from the hotel exterior. The work happened at dawn. Crews arrived with lifts and harnesses. News cameras gathered across the street. Former employees came too, some with children, some with old uniforms folded over their arms, some simply standing with coffee cups and wet eyes. Mara stood beside Mr. Alvarez as the gold letters came down one by one. A, M, B, R, O, S, L. Each letter lowered slowly, swinging in the morning air like a defeated crown. When the final E touched the sidewalk, no one cheered at first. Then a woman from housekeeping began clapping. Another joined. Then another. Soon the whole sidewalk filled with applause, not wild, not cruel, but relieved. The sound of people watching a door finally open. By then, Helena Ambrose had been indicted on multiple counts related to financial misconduct and obstruction. Victor had been removed permanently as CEO. Ambrose Holdings survived only by cutting the family out of control and selling major assets. Celeste Keene had entered cooperation agreements through her attorney and disappeared from society pages. Evelyn Ross became interim chair under strict oversight and began the slow, ugly process of returning money to those harmed. None of it was simple. Nothing real ever was. Some people called Mara ruthless. Others called her brilliant. A few called her bitter because there would always be people more offended by a woman's retaliation than a man's betrayal. Commentators debated whether she had gone too far, as if Victor's public wedding while still married had been a misunderstanding and Helena's threats were merely old-fashioned manners. Mara stopped watching those programs after the first week. She had work to do. The Mara Vale Grand reopened under a new charter that gave employees profit-sharing, whistleblower protections, and a seat on the ethics board. The West Penthouse became a legal aid suite for workers challenging powerful employers. The ballroom where Victor had laughed became the Elias Vale Hall. On the night of the dedication, Mara stood at the entrance watching staff guide guests inside. Not billionaires this time, not senators hungry for donations, not old money vultures. Families, former employees, students receiving scholarships, journalists who had followed the evidence carefully, people who knew what it meant to be overlooked. A little girl in a blue dress ran her fingers over the new plaque. Elias Vale Hall. For those who kept the truth when power demanded silence. The girl looked up at her mother. Who was he? Her mother smiled, someone brave. Mara turned away before tears could rise. Mr. Alvarez appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. You should be inside, he said. In a minute. You always say that. My father did too. Constantly. They stood together as music floated through the doors. After a while, Mr. Alvarez said, Do you miss him? Mara knew he did not mean Elias. She looked across the lobby, at the place where Victor had once stood surrounded by applause. No, she said. Then, after a pause, because truth deserved precision, she added, I miss who I thought he was. That is different. Mr. Alvarez nodded. Outside, evening settled over the city. The hotel's new sign glowed above the entrance. Mara Vale Grand. For years, Mara had thought revenge would feel like fire, hot, consuming, bright enough to burn away memory. Instead, it felt like architecture, slow, measured, built beam by beam until what once trapped you became something that could shelter others. She walked into Elias Vale Hall to applause. Not the hollow applause Victor had loved. This applause carried names, faces, histories, repairs. Mara stepped onto the stage beneath the chandeliers. The same marble, the same ceiling that had watched her humiliation and return. The building had not changed completely, But perhaps buildings were like people. What mattered was not whether the past remained inside them. What mattered was who held the keys now. Mara looked at the crowd. My father used to say numbers remember, she began, but I have learned that people remember too. For years, many of you carried truths you were punished for knowing. Tonight, this building belongs to those truths. She saw Evelyn in the back row, crying quietly. She saw former employees holding hands. She saw Naomi Chen near the side wall, arms folded, smiling just enough. She saw Mr. Alvarez standing straight as a soldier. And for one brief, impossible moment, she imagined her father near the service doors, clipboard against his chest, crooked smile on his face. Not sad. Not defeated. Proud. Mara touched the brass key, hanging now from a chain at her neck. Power is not evil by itself, she said, but power without accountability becomes hunger, and hunger, when inherited long enough, starts calling itself legacy. The room was silent. The Ambrose dynasty ended because it forgot that every person it stepped on had a memory. It forgot that silence is not consent. It forgot that humiliation can become evidence, that grief can become strategy, and that the person thrown out of the room may one day own the building. A soft laugh moved through the crowd. Mara smiled. Tonight we do not celebrate destruction. We celebrate correction. We celebrate names restored, wages returned, doors opened, and fear losing its favorite address. The applause rose again, stronger this time. Mara let it wash over her, not as worship, not as revenge, but as proof that endings could be useful if someone had the courage to build after them. Much later, after the dedication ended and the guests left, Mara returned to the ballroom alone. The chandeliers were dimmed. The floors had been cleaned. The altar from Victor's failed wedding was gone. In its place stood a simple arrangement of white flowers beside her father's photograph. Mara walked to it and placed the old brass key beneath the frame. I came back through the front door, she whispered. The building gave no answer. It did not need to. For once, silence felt peaceful. Dear viewers, if this story teaches anything, let it be this. Never mistake someone's patience for weakness, never confuse public humiliation with final defeat, and never believe money can bury the truth forever. Betrayal may break a heart, but courage, preparation, and self-respect can rebuild an entire life. When people misuse power to silence others, the strongest response is not noise. It is evidence, discipline, and the confidence to walk back into the room they threw you out of. So tell me, dear viewers, if you were Mara, would you have exposed Victor at the wedding, or would you have destroyed the Ambrose dynasty another way?